The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two members from Fairfax County, Senator Dave Marsden. Good to see you, sir.
Good to be here, Woody.
Delegate Dave Albo. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks. Love coming.
I want to congratulate the House on defeating the Senate in the basketball game last night.
Right.
So let's have a little competition here today.
Oh, there you go.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in your district, especially in terms of the economy. I know we've been in a downturn for a number of years.
Right.
We've lost a lot of revenue. We have a budget deficit as a result of our continued dependency on Washington, D.C.
Well, Dave and I represent the same place, which is Springfield, Burke area. It's the southern tip of Fairfax County. We have a pretty bad economic slump going on, and people just don't really notice exactly what's going on. But because of the sequester from the federal government and the fact that the federal government is now doing all low-bid contracts, people who used to be making, say, $62 an hour programming computers are now making $47. And when they make $47, they have less money to spend, so there's less tax revenue, less income tax revenue, and that means that since Northern Virginia supplies 40% of the tax revenue to the state is really hurt. I mean, Fairfax County economic growth is now zero. Zero. And it's just because of the federal government slowdown.
So how do we cure that? I know there's this move to go to a new Virginia economy, create new jobs, bring more businesses in, and retain the ones we currently have.
Well, certainly Governor McAuliffe has been working hard in that direction because of sequester to kind of get Northern Virginia to retool to serve the private sector as opposed to just the government sector and defense, which we've relied on so much. And that's not an easy thing to do. There's real competition in the private sector world in places all over the country, from the Silicon Valley to Austin, Texas, Denver, Colorado. Whereas we sort of have the advantage because of our geographic closeness to Washington, D.C. That works out very well for us. So the governor has been quite right to try to get us to shift away from the fact that, look, the federal government is not going to be there the same way it's been there in the past. Even if we ramp up defense spending and what have you, as Delegate Albo said, the rules are a little different in terms of the profitability that will be coming in, and it does affect our economy.
So what about areas like cybersecurity, biomedical research? Are those some opportunities to increase revenue to the state?
Well, first of all, I compliment the governor. I'm a Republican, he's a Democrat, but I got to give somebody a high five when they're doing a good job. And he's out there actually hustling, bringing business. This CoStar company, the tech company, brought to Richmond, fantastic deal. What was the original question? Yes?
Well, with cybersecurity and
right.
biomedical research.
The reason I was thinking of the governor is because he had mentioned in his speech that cybersecurity, they started at $88K. Mm-hmm. So we need to get young people into this field, and I know that the colleges and universities, and especially community colleges, are now kind of pushing that. You don't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree. So when I got out of school at UVA in 1984, the thing to do was to get a 4-year degree and then go to graduate school and get a job. Now, auto mechanics, HVAC, cybersecurity, people with skills can make money, and we need to start directing people towards a skill economy as opposed to everybody going to college and reading Chaucer and becoming an educated liberal thinker. They need skills.
So we need to balance science, technology, engineering, math, and health against certificates that people out of high school can garner good work and salaries.
Yeah, and that's true. And while those are very good things, what I worry about sometimes is that we put so much money into the way we run things through our IT systems, and we're spending so much money on the security for those things that we're not doing the fundamental things that make people's lives better. When I ran the Department of Juvenile Justice, I had a budget of, I don't know, 190-some million dollars, of which 25 million was IT. And I turned to my people one day and I said, does any of this IT stuff we're doing make kids behave better? No, it allows us to communicate with each other better and what have you. And there certainly were benefits to the research, because data is so important to knowing what to do, to solve societal problems. But at the same time, we sometimes focus so much on those things we forget that our original intention was to change behavior or provide services to people and what have you. And so much of the money that we spend now in the Commonwealth goes towards information technology. We just have to be careful that we don't get so overboard with it that we forget that providing services to people aren't always just IT.
Now, I know the Go Virginia legislation is still in its infancy, the attempt to have regions cooperate a little bit more. How's that working in your opinion?
Well, I mean, the Go Virginia idea was to, instead of having politicians decide what economic incentives are best for bringing in business, we create a board of business people to tell us what businesses want to hear and see. So I think the concept is working. It's only been about 1 year we've had it, and I think they're facing some budget cuts because of the economic slowdown. So it's probably too early to tell, but I certainly think that the idea that business people know what they want better than politicians is probably a good one.
And what about regional cooperation? Do you see that improving, Senator?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of evidence in it yet. It's a huge problem in Northern Virginia, trying to get Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia to cooperate. Cultures are very, very different. But one of the things I've learned in my involvement with the Southern Legislative Conference is that especially communities to the south of us have learned to put academia, business, and government together to try to lure manufacturing back, because we do have some advantages in the United States right now. Energy costs are very low. And so if we can, a lot of the jobs that were lost, to overseas went there because of cheap labor. And what's happening now is there's more of a slant towards skilled labor who can do robotics, do the programming, do the repair and operation of those machines, so that the robotics come back, and the community colleges in a lot of these southern areas, we're in these tri-state areas in the south, they're all cooperating to bring these folks back in because of the low energy costs, but they're training the workforce to be able to do that for them in areas in the south that are basically lower tax areas. So the advantages are there, but you do just have to be able to coordinate across state lines, municipal lines, and bring government, business, and academia together to make it all happen.
Let's talk a little bit about higher education, especially the cost and the percentage of our residents who are actually able to attend our institutions of higher learning. I know you have some legislation in regarding that.
Well, I've been in a knockdown, drag-out fight with the colleges and universities, along with Tim Hugo, about the number of out-of-state students. We have a bill that requires every school to be at least 75%. The only four that are out of compliance is JMU, Virginia Tech, UVA, and William & Mary. Now JMU is almost, I think they're 74.9%. They did it without having legislation, so give them a high five like I gave the governor a high five on economic development. Virginia Tech's getting pretty close, but the big offenders are UVA and William & Mary. They're still in the 67-ish, 68% range. The reason it's important to me is this. When I graduated from West Springfield High School, so Dave represents West Springfield, I do too, but I also went there. Of a class of 600, about 32 of us got into UVA. Now, out of the class of 600, it's only 12. So it's gotten almost 300% harder to get into UVA or William & Mary, and it's because they haven't expanded enrollment at the same level as population. So I don't ever want UVA and William & Mary to be a big state school like Ohio State. That would ruin the place. But really, I mean, having only 67% of the slots reserved for in-state kids is ludicrous.
Now, to what extent do those out-of-state students help subsidize those in-state students in terms of tuition?
Well, they do, but and then we got another problem. So the schools were always saying we need the out-of-state students because they pay like $24,000 instead of $14,000. And then I found out that UVA is spending about $30 million of the money they get from out-of-state students to give to out-of-state students to buy their tuition down. So that set me off. And then I found out that they're using in-state money to give financial aid to in-state students. So that's great for a kid who can't afford to go. But the problem is that I've saved money. I bought a 2-year prepaid tuition for my kid in a 529, and it was hard for me to save that kind of money. And now I find out that I'm not saving for my kid, I'm saving for my kid and somebody else I don't even know. When I tell my constituents that, they go crazy. So one of the parts of the bill that I submitted says over the next couple of years, the schools are going to have to wean themselves off of using tuition for financial aid.
Now, what about the cost of higher education? Why has it skyrocketed so much, and what can we do about it to help students and their families?
Well, certainly, it's like, you know, many problems. There's a number of factors in place here. Certainly, universities have a lot of overhead. They've increased that overhead over the year. They're doing all kinds of special projects and have all kinds of positions in place that some people question. But the bottom line is that we've reduced our contribution to these colleges and universities consistently over the years. In my view, we have paid for what we're doing in this Commonwealth, not by raising taxes or adjusting taxes for inflation, but we take it away from public employees. It used to be we funded them right up front because they had a step system. Then we went in 1996 to the system. It was like, hey, we'll give you a 5% agency and then you can distribute it on merit rather than us give you that 5% to cover all the steps. And guess what? We've never funded it. Never funded it. And so we're taking the money out of state employees, and we're also reducing the amount of money we put into colleges, which puts the pressure on them to take out-of-state students because they get more money. Now, the colleges and universities are not blameless here. It's not just all that one factor, but it is a complex kind of equation here. I think UVA is down to what, 8% state support from times when it was over 50, I believe, back in the 60s, 70s, whatever. And so we are, rather than raising taxes and doing what, we're taking it away from our colleges and universities and our public employees, and that's how we're funding all the new stuff that we want to do.
Yeah, there's another interesting statistic, though, because the schools, Dave is right, we're not funding them like we should, but they're not blameless. For every dollar decrease in state funding, they've increased tuition by $2. So I don't know what the deal is, but I go there and I see these beautiful buildings. I mean, they had a vegan station at JMU where you could, at the cafeteria.
Really?
I mean, come on. So they're building these country clubs that people will never be able to afford when they get out. They could never afford that lifestyle when they get out. So what needs to happen is the state, which is General Assembly, needs to pony up some more money to schools, and then they need to do their part and start cutting their spending so that they can provide, education.
Now, some have suggested that they also should use some of their reserves. Someone just told me recently that the University of Virginia has a greater reserve than the state's rainy day fund.
This is true, and that certainly does raise concerns. But look, a lot of what UVA does, that money isn't just mad money that they can spend on anything. A lot of that money that goes into their trust fund, if you will, has to pay for this professorship or has to be for this particular project or this particular thing. It isn't like money in a checking account that they can just go use. And they have taken some of that money and on the interest they've earned on it to do special projects. And one of them this year is UVA. It's a small step, but they've increased in-state students by 100. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you take 100 out-of-states away and add 100 in-states, it does have a percentage impact on the situation. It's a step in the right direction, and I think it's largely because of folks like Dave Albo who've put the pressure on them in the spotlight and Bill DeSteff in the Senate. And while I don't agree with all of the arguments, it is an argument that we need to have, and it is something that has gotten UVA to move in the right direction, and I think it's a good thing.
So more steps need to be taken, I assume.
Yeah, sure. And then Dave's right. A lot of this reserve money is money they've raised themselves. I, as a state delegate, don't have the authority to tell UVA what to do with private funds that they've raised. And so this big, massive reserve that they've acquired, some of it's public money, and so I do have a right to tell them what to do with the public money. But most of it is private money, and they have every right to spend that how they want.
Yeah, and Woody, I had a conversation about 12 years ago with the chancellor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It was an interesting conversation. He says, boy, I really like the way you guys do higher ed in Virginia and how you fund it. I said, what are you talking about? You guys have the lowest in-state tuition, and you've really invested in it, and we charge a great deal more. And he said, yeah, but here's the difference. He says, we're subsidizing very wealthy people to come to the University of North Carolina. What you do is charge higher tuition and then take that money and give it to kids who can't afford to go, but you're getting money from folks who can afford to pay it. Now that's not a perfect, scenario or perfect solution for things, but it is an equation that you have to consider here, is that the lower you drive tuition, the more you're subsidizing people who should be able to pay. So UVA's program is such that they try to be blind about who gets in with regards to ability to pay, and then they have the resources there to make sure that you get out with only a limited amount of debt. And I can't remember what the numbers are, but they've done a really good job in that regard. So it's a mixed picture. Dave's right, UVA's right. Everybody's trying to get the formula correct as to how much we should do for in-state students versus how much we should do with students, period, and how much we should bring in from out of state.
Now, I want to highlight some legislation that you've both worked on. You last year, you're collaborating this year. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat. It highlights how bipartisan things are here, and it relates to an oil derivative of marijuana. Talk to us about that.
Maybe I'll tell you about what the law we did last year,
Yes.
and then let Dave explain the work he's doing to get these people access to it. So we found out that for some kids, mostly kids, who have what's called intractable epilepsy, this is the kind of epilepsy that is so debilitating, 100 seizures a day, and medications just don't work. Found out that a derivative of the marijuana plant called CBD oil or THCA oil actually reduces the seizures dramatically. And since it's derived from the marijuana plant, it was illegal. Also, this oil, you can't get high from it. I mean, it's just, it's
Non-psychoactive.
Non-psychoactive, thank you. So we made a law last year that said that if you have intractable epilepsy, or your kid has intractable epilepsy, and you have a prescription from a doctor saying that this oil would help you, then you cannot be prosecuted for possession of marijuana.
So
if
that's
you
an
have these
affirmative
oils.
defense in
The
essence.
affirmative defense, exactly. Now the problem then is where I'll hand off to Dave here is, how would somebody get the stuff in the
Right.
first place?
Okay, so what we came up with was a very, very conservative approach. We are allowing up to 5 manufacturers, processors in Virginia, one for each health department region. I don't think we're going to reach that number. We'll probably be lucky to get one. But what it will allow it to do is the marijuana is grown on the facility, processed at the facility, and dispensed from the facility. In other words, the facility, you can come by and pick it up, or it can be delivered to you by an employee of the processor. And last year we passed that bill, but we had to do a reenactment clause because we needed a year to get the pharmacy board to put the regulations in place, which they've done. And we put an emergency clause on the reenactment this year to get the 280-day public review process in place. So probably by late 2018, these facilities will be able to create these oils. And if a child and their family have a doctor's certificate that they are diagnosed with intractable epilepsy, they will have access to these non-psychoactive oils. It's the most conservative approach in the country. It doesn't involve 8 licenses for growing with people all over the state. It's going to be very hard to redirect this product toward any illegal means. And we think, and Dave believes too, that this is a very responsible way for Virginia to put its toe in this market in ways that we know will help people without speculating about who it's going to help. We have pretty good evidence. And the beauty of it is the FDA drugs for these kids have huge side effects. These appear to have none, and that's the real advantage.
Great, great. Now, I want you to talk about some legislation that you have regarding the internet, the ability to resell tickets once you buy them on the internet.
Well, one thing I think my wife says, the one thing she didn't know about Dave Albo when she got married is that I'm a metalhead. I love the stuff. So, Kiss, AC/DC, Judas Priest. So a number of years ago, I got tickets to Iron Maiden. And I found out that I couldn't go, mostly because my wife said we're going on family vacation.
Yes.
So I wanted to sell the tickets or give them to a friend. And they were using a platform, Ticketmaster, that required me to sell the tickets on their resale platform on the internet. Well, the show didn't sell out, which I can't understand how that could possibly happen, but it didn't sell out. And then no one would buy my tickets. I couldn't even give them to somebody because these tickets restrictions were you had to have your ID or a credit card that you bought the tickets with. So what my bill says is that when you buy a ticket, you can't be restricted in the way that you would resell it. So you could put it on the Ticketmaster system, you could put it on StubHub, you could put it on Craigslist, you could sell it to a friend, you could give it to a friend. And so it's basically saying that your ticket becomes your property right.
So is there much resistance to that?
Oh, God, yes. You know when there's money involved because there's now 30 lobbyists against the bill. And the reason that there's money involved is because Ticketmaster charges 15%. So if I resell my Iron Maiden seats, they get 15%. What they're really doing is they're capturing 15% of the scalpers market, right? Because the scalpers will use robots to buy tickets en masse, and then the scalpers put it out there. And then Ticketmaster's all upset because the scalpers are making the markup. So they're trying to make the 15% on the markup. It's a good way for them to kind of thwart scalping. They're not necessarily bad guys in this, but one of the things I've found in 24 years of passing laws is it's easy to stop a behavior. I can pass a law that stops a behavior. The problem is getting innocent behavior also within that law, you know? And so what they've done is they've thwarted scalpers, but now they have made regular people who just want to go to a show or go to a Caps game, they've made it impossible for them to sell their tickets if they can't go.
Great. I want to circle back to technology in a minute, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some legislation you have regarding juveniles.
Yeah, it is. And first off, I'm a Democrat. I listen to James Taylor. He's a Republican. He listens to metalhead. So, at any rate, no. What we've had this year, and Dave's been aware of it. We've talked over the years, is that the Supreme Court has ruled that kids sentenced to life without parole in non-homicide cases, it's called Graham versus Florida, need a meaningful and realistic opportunity at release. And our Supreme Court ruled that, well, geriatric parole at age 60 qualifies as a meaningful and realistic opportunity. That was challenged in federal court, and in the Eastern District it was overturned. It was appealed to the Fourth Circuit by our Attorney General, and a three-judge panel ruled that they agreed with the Eastern District that geriatric parole is not a meaningful, realistic release. And so the Attorney General asked for what's called an en banc, which is all the justices of the Fourth Circuit to hear the case. It was denied. So at this point in time, the legal aspect of that is done, and I have a bill that deals with not only those kids, but even homicide kids, because in Montgomery versus Louisiana, basically the Supreme Court said the same thing. These kids need some opportunity at release. Not everybody is irredeemable. And so we've lumped all these kinds of cases together. And so what we need is a meaningful and realistic opportunity at release. And this is a hard pill for folks to swallow in a no parole state, because what I'm asking for is a parole exemption for children sentenced as adults to periods of time where they're incarcerated longer than 20 years to have an opportunity to be released on parole. And the first thing people are going to say is, you've just created a parole option for Lee Boyd Malvo. Well, there's a parole option for Charles Manson. He does not get out of prison. But the Supreme Court has spoken, and it's our obligation to meet what our Supreme Court says. That's the way our legal system works. And I'm just hoping that we can get something done this year to meet the requirements there without trying to delay it and trying to come up with means to avoid it. We need to do something, and I'm going to be bringing it over to Dave's committee, hopefully if I get it out of the Senate, to Dave's committee, and we'll need to have a really tough discussion, because this is not easy stuff. This is what you call heavy lifting in a legislature. There's about 79 of these kids who the Supreme Court has asked us to provide justice to, and we have to find a responsible way to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to need help from the chair of the Courts of Justice Committee in the House.
Yeah. So it's a tough bill, because you're asking now the first exception to elimination of parole, which we did in 1994. And myself and all my Republican colleagues think that's one of the things that's made Virginia one of the safest states in the country. And one thing you know is, as soon as you make an exception for somebody, then the Christmas tree ornaments start getting hung, and people come back for exception, exception, exception. So, but I think Dave's right on this. Whether you want to make an exception or not, you don't really have a choice now, because the courts have said we have to do it. So,
Well, I wanted to circle back to technology because you've been wrestling with that on courts of justice. You had Uber, Lyft a couple of years ago. Now I assume you still have issues around Airbnb. You had a really interesting dialogue last year about the use of drones and
Yep, we got that
privacy
going
concerns.
again.
Talk to us about those technological developments that the law seems to always be behind.
Well, I think that when Thomas Jefferson helped write the Virginia Constitution and the Virginia Code and George Washington, all those guys, they never imagined that you could take a piece of glass and look at it and then see images from places, with these things called electricity that flies around the universe, right? Who in a million years would have ever thought of that? So that's why our code is always behind because, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, iPhone's only 10 years old. So we have some catch up to do. The drone thing is really interesting because now you can fly a drone with a camera on it into somebody's backyard and look in their window and check them out when they're in their bathing suit at their swimming pool. And we're trying to find ways to stop behavior that we all know we don't like. But again, when you try to stop one behavior, what innocent behavior are you also getting? Example there would be that Dominion Power uses drones to check their lines, and when they're flying the drone from home base to the line, they go over people's yards, right? They're not intending on peeping, but they accidentally do because they need to see the navigation. So these things are very difficult because you know how to do it. I can ban drones, but you don't want to ban drones for good behavior.
Right. A lot of balancing going on, especially when you have an incumbent like taxi cabs, and then you have Uber and Lyft. Those are competing interests that you as the legislator have to balance.
Well, yeah, and we've got a bill this year as Uber wants to get into the pizza delivery business, and they want and it's all about what kind of insurance they need to carry. Now, if you're a Domino's delivery driver, Domino's covers your situation. What Uber wants to do is to allow, if you're just delivering pizzas as an Uber driver, they want you on your own insurance. And the rest of the taxi cab world and what have you, or the Uber world says there should be a category of when you're in a commercial situation that you ought to have increased insurance above and beyond your personal stuff. So it's just a weird fight. Dave's right. Who could have ever imagined these things? Even 7 years ago, 8 years. Technology is sort of overtaking us with our ability to cope with it. But what was funny is on the Airbnb, I had a town hall meeting on it, and in an area that's heavily Democratic, and I never see my Republican constituents there. So they were all out, and they don't like Airbnb. My Democratic constituents seem to like it a little better. So I had Democrats screaming for no regulation, and I had Republicans screaming to regulate this thing. So it was really kind of funny, but it is a problem. It is something that we've got some people who are basically renting out their house full time to groups coming in, and it is disquieting to the neighborhood. And I get it.
We're going to have to leave it there.
All right.
Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Mr. Chairman,
Thanks, Woody.
Dave Albo and Dave Marsden from the Senate. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
They went down like everybody else. You know what the anecdote